I still remember that quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when the world feels unhurried. The streets were calm, washed in the soft glow of early autumn sunlight, and the air carried that faint crispness that hints at the changing season. I hadn't planned much for the day, just a visit to an old friend's house, the kind of routine stop that never felt like more than an excuse to catch up. When I rang the bell, it wasn't my friend who greeted me. Instead, the door opened to reveal his mother, Clara. She was, as always, a picture of quiet grace, her dark hair pulled loosely back, a simple sweater resting easily on her shoulders. She had that way about her, a warmth that made you feel instantly welcome, like stepping into her home was a kind of comfort in itself. "Come in," she said with a smile, stepping aside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted out as I crossed the threshold, mingling with the faint sweetness of something baked earlier. The house felt calm, almost too calm, and I realized quickly that my friend wasn't around. "It's just me today," Clara explained as she guided me toward the kitchen. "He's off running errands, probably won't be back for a while. But I'm glad you stopped by." I set my jacket over a chair and took a seat at the kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns across the wooden surface. Clara poured me a cup of coffee, and I noticed how her movements were unhurried, thoughtful, as if her mind was somewhere else. We talked lightly at first about ordinary things, work, the weather, little details that usually filled small moments. But there was something different in her eyes that day. She was listening, yes, but she was also studying me, like she was turning something over in her mind. "Actually," she said after a pause, leaning back against the counter. Her hand lifted absently to brush a strand of hair from her cheek, and her gaze softened in a way that made my pulse quicken, though I couldn't explain why. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." The words landed quietly, yet they carried weight. I looked at her, curious. "Someone?" She nodded, the corners of her mouth curving into the kind of smile that held a secret. "A friend of mine. She just moved back into town. I think you two might get along." Her tone was casual, but I could hear the intention beneath it. And though I wasn't sure what to make of it, I felt a stir of something unexpected, a flicker of anticipation, a curiosity that pulled at me. I sipped my coffee, the warmth grounding me as I searched her face. Clara's eyes held mine, calm and steady, but filled with something unspoken. And in that moment, sitting in the golden afternoon light, I had the distinct sense that my day was about to take a turn I hadn't planned for something I couldn't quite name yet, but already felt that it wasn't long after Clara's quiet suggestion that I heard the soft chime of the doorbell. She excused herself with that same knowing smile, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the muted hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. I sat there, sipping the last of my coffee, wondering who this friend could be. There was a strange sense of expectancy in the air, the kind that makes time feel slower, every sound sharper. Then I heard the front door open, followed by the gentle rise of voices, Clara's welcoming tone, and another voice I didn't recognize. Low, calm, feminine. A moment later, Clara returned, and beside her walked a woman I had never seen before. "Elena," Clara said with warmth, "this is Daniel. He's been a friend of the family for years." Then, turning to me, she added, "And Daniel, this is my dear friend Elena. She just moved back to town." Elena. Even her name carried a kind of elegance. She looked to be around Clara's age, early 40s perhaps, though she carried herself with the poise of someone who had seen a little of life and learned how to move gracefully through it. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown with strands of silver that only seemed to add to her presence, framed her face in soft waves. Her eyes, calm, observing, with a trace of reserve, met mine as she offered her hand. I rose from my chair, suddenly aware of my own movements, and reached out. "Nice to meet you," she said, her voice gentle but steady. Our hands met. For the briefest moment, it was just a polite handshake. Then something subtle shifted. Her touch lingered a second longer than expected, her palm warm against mine. It wasn't deliberate, but it wasn't rushed either. And in that single heartbeat, I felt an awareness stir between us, quiet yet undeniable. We settled around the table, Clara pouring Elena a cup of coffee, her eyes glinting with a subtle satisfaction, as if she was enjoying a moment she had quietly orchestrated. Conversation began simply enough. Where Elena had been living before, what brought her back? She spoke with ease, though there was a restraint beneath her words, a carefulness, as though she wasn't used to sharing too much at once. I found myself watching her more than listening at times, the way her fingers curled lightly around the coffee cup, how her smile appeared slowly, as if unfolding instead of arriving all at once. Every now and then, her gaze would meet mine across the table, and those brief connections felt charged with something I couldn't quite define. Clara carried much of the conversation, guiding us gently, but I noticed the way she sometimes glanced at me when Elena was speaking, her expression soft, almost approving, like a quiet nod to something she hoped would take root. And though the afternoon carried on in its easy rhythm, I couldn't shake the awareness building in me that this wasn't just a casual introduction. It was the beginning of something unexpected, yet already drawing me in. Dinner that night felt like it belonged to another world. Clara, ever the gracious host, had prepared a simple but beautiful meal: roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread still warm from the oven, a salad bright with color. The table was set with care, candles flickering softly in their holders, casting a golden glow across the room. I hadn't planned to stay long, but Clara had insisted, and Elena, with a quiet smile, had agreed. So, I found myself seated across from her, the three of us sharing a meal that felt less like routine and more like an occasion. The conversation began light, small stories, laughter over Clara's playful teasing, but it wasn't long before it deepened. Elena spoke about her years away, the cities she'd lived in, the people she'd met. Her words carried a certain weight, not heavy, but thoughtful, as though each memory had left a mark on her. I listened more intently than I expected to. It wasn't just what she said, but the way she said it, the calm steadiness of her tone, the softness that hinted at vulnerability just beneath her confidence. She had a way of speaking that made you lean in without realizing, as though each word invited you closer. And every so often, her eyes would meet mine. Just a glance, just long enough to hold, but it was enough to quicken something in me. A quiet awareness. At one point, as Clara reached to pour wine, Elena leaned slightly toward me to pass the basket of bread. Her shoulder brushed mine, light as air, but enough to send a sudden warmth across my skin. She didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she did and chose not to draw attention to it. Either way, I felt the touch linger long after it had passed. The hours seemed to slip by without notice. Clara kept the mood lively, but I could feel her watching us in small, almost invisible ways, like someone giving space while making sure the ground beneath us was steady. The music in the background was soft, an old record spinning slowly, its gentle melody weaving itself through the evening. There was laughter, yes, but also pauses, moments where silence filled the space between words, not awkward but charged. As dessert was served, something sweet and delicate Clara had made earlier, I realized how comfortable I felt, how natural the flow of the night had become. Yet underneath that comfort was a tension, subtle but undeniable, like the quiet hum of electricity, always there, waiting to spark. When Elena laughed, her hand lifted briefly to her chest, her head tilting back just slightly. I caught myself smiling, not just at the sound, but at the sight of her, so present, so unguarded in that instant. And when she noticed me watching, her gaze held mine just a moment too long, before she looked down with a small, almost shy curve of her lips. It was in that simple exchange that I felt it most clearly. This wasn't just dinner with a friend's mother and her guest. Something was forming, quietly, delicately, between us. Something neither of us had spoken, yet both seemed to feel. After dinner, the evening had settled into a comfortable quiet. The candles had burned low, the record had spun to silence, and Clara excused herself for a while, leaving Elena and me at the table. The hush between us wasn't awkward. It was charged, like a pause that waited to be filled. Elena's eyes drifted toward the window, where the faint silver of moonlight spilled through the curtains. She set her glass down, fingers brushing the rim thoughtfully before she looked at me. "Would you like some air?" she asked softly. "It's such a clear night." I nodded without hesitation. There was something in her voice, a calm invitation, but also a desire for space beyond the walls of the house. Together, we stepped outside into the cool night. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine from Clara's garden, mingling with the earthy dampness of grass that had cooled under the moon. The quiet was different out there. No hum of appliances, no tick of the clock, just the distant chirp of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. We walked side by side down the stone path that led from the porch into the open yard. For a while, neither of us spoke. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be broken, one that let you hear the rhythm of your own footsteps, the whisper of the night, the steady breath of the person beside you. Finally, Elena spoke, her tone quieter now, stripped of the polite layers it carried at dinner. It's strange coming back, she admitted. This town holds so many memories, and yet it feels like I hardly recognize it anymore. Like I've changed too much to fit the pieces back together. I glanced at her, noticing the way her expression softened as she looked ahead, her features caught in the pale wash of moonlight. There was strength in her words, but also fragility, as if she was admitting something she didn't often share. I think, I said slowly, sometimes it's not about fitting the pieces back. Sometimes it's about finding new ones. She turned her head then, and her eyes met mine, curious, a little searching. For a moment, the world felt very still. As we walked further, our hands brushed once lightly. Then again, slower this time. Neither of us pulled away. The third time, her fingers lingered, sliding against mine, testing the space between hesitation and intention. I let my hand relax, and hers slipped naturally into it, her grip gentle, almost tentative. The contact was simple, nothing dramatic, yet it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. Warmth spread from the touch, quiet but steady, grounding me in the moment. We walked like that, fingers entwined, beneath the stretch of stars overhead. I wanted to speak, to name the feeling building between us, but words felt unnecessary. The silence, the closeness, the simple act of her hand in mine, it said more than I could. And as the night air wrapped around us, cool and fragrant, I realized this was no longer just an introduction or a chance meeting. Something was unfolding here, something delicate, unspoken, but real that we wandered until the stone path gave way to soft grass, the kind that muffled our footsteps and made the world seem quieter still. Overhead, the branches of a tall oak stretched wide, its leaves shifting gently with the breeze. Between the breaks in the canopy, the stars shone down, distant and countless, scattered across the sky like spilled light. We stopped beneath that tree without planning to. It was as though the night itself had guided us there. Elena let go of my hand slowly, her fingers slipping away, and leaned back against the trunk. For a moment, she tilted her head upward, watching the sky, her face soft in the moonlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. "But it makes you feel so small, doesn't it? Like all the things we worry about, they don't matter so much up there." Her words carried a quiet weight, and I sensed something deeper lingering behind them. I stepped closer, not too close, just enough to feel connected. "Maybe," I said, my voice low, "but maybe it also reminds us that the small things matter. The connections we make, the moments that change us." She lowered her gaze then, and when her eyes met mine, they weren't guarded anymore. They were open, vulnerable, searching. "Can I admit something?" she asked, her voice steady but soft. "Of course," I replied. "I wasn't sure about meeting you tonight," she confessed. Her fingers traced the bark of the tree absent-mindedly, as if grounding herself. "Clara had mentioned you before, and I thought maybe it was better not to. I worried about what people might think, about the years between us, about stepping into something that might not make sense." Her honesty struck me with a quiet force. She wasn't saying it with drama or fear. She was saying it with sincerity, a truth she couldn't hide anymore. I let the silence hold for a moment, then spoke carefully, choosing each word with the same honesty she had given me. "I don't care about years, Elena. Not when I feel this." I hesitated, my chest tightening as I searched for the right words. "This pull toward you. It's not about numbers or how it looks to anyone else. It's about how you make me feel when you look at me, like I'm seen." Her breath caught faintly, her eyes glimmering with something I couldn't quite read, surprise, relief, maybe even hope. I stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Her hair shifted in the breeze, a loose strand brushing across her cheek. Instinctively, gently, I reached up to tuck it back behind her ear. My fingertips grazed her skin, warm and soft, and in that single touch, I felt the weight of everything unspoken between us. She didn't move away. Instead, she closed her eyes for just a second, leaning ever so slightly into the touch, as if allowing herself the smallest surrender. When her eyes opened again, the silence between us was louder than words. The night seemed to pause, the crickets, the wind, even the stars above, as though waiting for what might come next. And in that stillness, I knew, whatever fear lingered in her heart, it was met by the same quiet longing in mine. The silence between us stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable, more like a fragile thread that neither of us wanted to break too quickly. Elena's eyes held mine, steady yet uncertain, as if weighing every thought against every feeling. The night air wrapped around us, cool and delicate, carrying the faint scent of the garden's jasmine. She took a slow breath, her shoulders lifting gently, before stepping closer. Her hand rose halfway, hesitated, then found its way to my chest. The touch was feather-light at first, as though she was unsure if she should stay there, but then her palm rested fully, her warmth seeping through the fabric of my shirt. I felt the quiet rhythm of my heartbeat beneath her hand, strong and unsteady all at once. "Elena," I murmured, her name slipping out like a confession. She looked up at me then, her eyes shimmering with something unguarded, soft fear, quiet hope, and a vulnerability she had been holding back all evening. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she let her weight lean forward, closing the space between us. Instinct took over. I lifted my arms slowly, carefully, as though asking permission with every movement. When she didn't step back, I drew her gently against me. Her arms slipped around my waist, hesitant at first, then firmer, her cheek resting lightly against my shoulder. The closeness felt both delicate and inevitable, like something that had been waiting for the right moment. I could feel the warmth of her body pressed softly against mine, the faint tremble of her breath as she let herself settle into the embrace. Time seemed to blur in that instant. The world beyond us, the porch, the house, the distant hum of crickets, faded until all I knew was the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat, thudding faintly against my chest. "I didn't think this would happen," she whispered, her voice muffled by the closeness. "Neither did I admitted softly. "But I'm glad it did." She let out a sound that was half a sigh, half a laugh, gentle, almost disbelieving. Her fingers curled slightly at my back, as though anchoring herself in the moment. From the porch, I caught a glimpse of Clara standing at the door, her figure outlined by the faint glow of the kitchen light. She didn't interrupt, didn't speak. Instead, she simply watched for a second, her expression tender, almost protective. Then she turned away, giving us the privacy of this moment, as if she had known all along where the evening would lead. I tightened my hold just slightly, enough to let Elena know she was safe there, that she didn't need to carry hesitation alone. She leaned into me more fully, and I felt her breathing slow, steadier now, like someone finally letting go of a weight they had been carrying quietly. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a declaration. It was just an embrace, simple, unhurried, and yet more powerful than either of us expected. And in that stillness, I understood. This was not just the beginning of something fragile. It was the beginning of something real. The morning light spilled gently across the kitchen, warmer and softer than the night before. It carried with it a sense of calm, as though the house itself had shifted into a quieter rhythm. I had slept little, not from discomfort, but from replaying the evening in my mind. The walk, the confessions beneath the stars, the way Elena had rested in my arms as though she belonged there. When I came into the kitchen, the air was filled with the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread. Clara was already there, humming softly to herself as she moved about the stove. She glanced over her shoulder with that familiar, knowing smile. "Morning," she said lightly, as though nothing about last night had been extraordinary, though her eyes carried a sparkle that suggested otherwise. "Coffee's ready. Elena's just in the garden." I poured myself a cup, the warmth grounding me as I stepped to the window. Outside, I saw her, Elena, sitting on the garden bench, her posture relaxed, her face turned toward the sunlight. She looked different somehow, not outwardly, but in the way someone looks when they've allowed themselves to set down a hidden weight. When I joined her, the wooden bench creaked slightly under my weight. She turned, offering me a soft smile that reached her eyes. "Good morning," she said, her voice quieter, gentler than the night before. "Morning," I replied, returning the smile. For a moment, we just sat there, listening to the hum of bees among the flowers, the distant sound of Clara moving about inside. Our hands rested near each other on the bench, not quite touching. Then slowly, her fingers shifted, brushing against mine. I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned my palm up, letting her hand slip into it as naturally as if it had always belonged there. We didn't need to say much. There was an ease between us now, the kind that comes after barriers have been crossed, when silence feels as expressive as words. When Clara eventually stepped out with a tray, plates of toast, bowls of fruit, she set it on the small table beside us. Her eyes lingered briefly on our joined hands, and her smile deepened. She didn't tease, not outright, but her tone was playful as she said, "I see the introductions went well." Elena laughed softly, a faint blush rising in her cheeks, and even I couldn't help but smile at the understatement. The three of us sat together then, sharing breakfast in the morning sun. It felt easy, unforced, like the natural continuation of something already set in motion. The day stretched ahead with its ordinary tasks and routines, yet beneath it all was a quiet promise that the night before hadn't been fleeting. As Elena reached for the coffee pot, her fingers brushed mine again, deliberate this time. Our eyes met briefly, and in that simple glance, I felt it clearly. This was only the beginning. Unexpected, yes. Unplanned, certainly. But real. And sometimes, I thought, that's the best kind of beginning there is.